Have you ever just, marveled at how elite athletes seem to push past what seems possible? They're constantly pushing boundaries, but somehow, most of the time, they don't completely break down. It's this really delicate balance, isn't it? Especially in sports like soccer, super fast, high impact. They're always hunting for that edge, that specific training tweak that makes them better, but also keeps them safe from injuries. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take complex research, sometimes stacks of it, and really unpack it to get to the core of what matters. Our mission, simple, to get you well-informed, fast. And today we are diving into a study asking a really crucial question for young soccer players and, their coaches too. Can a specific, pretty powerful type of strength training boost performance without messing things up during actual gameplay? So the study we're digging into today is titled Impact of Weekly Eccentric Overload Training on Locomotor and Mechanical Performance in Youth Soccer Players. The authors are Vicente Dios-Álvarez, Ezequiel, Alexis Padrón-Cabo, and Julen Castellano. And you can find it published in the Journal of Sports Science and Medicine. It's in volume 24, pages 351 to 362, put online June 1st, 2025. And for anyone who really wants to get into the nitty-gritty, the DOI is https://doi.org. It's on 10-52082JSSM.20.351. We'll make sure that's accessible. Think of this deep dive as, well, your shortcut. We're breaking down the complex science, looking at some frankly surprising results, and thinking about what it actually means on the ground. We want to help you grasp what really matters for athletes and coaches so you're armed with the latest info. Okay, let's get into it. At the heart of this study, there are really two key ideas. Small-sided games, people call them SSGs, and eccentric overload training, or EOT. Let's maybe start with SSGs. What exactly are we talking about when we say small-sided game in soccer?
Right. SSGs, small-sided games, are pretty much what they sound like. They're basically modified soccer games. You play on smaller fields, maybe tweak the rules a bit, and critically, you have fewer players on the pitch, and they are everywhere in soccer training. I mean, from the youngest kids in academies right up to the top professional teams, everyone uses them. The reason they're so popular is simple. They work, they're incredibly effective. SSGs are this fantastic sort of all-in-one tool. They help improve technical skills, your dribbling, passing, shooting, but also tactical thinking, decision-making under pressure, and physical fitness all at the same time. And what's great is how adaptable they are. A coach can change the field size, player numbers, add specific rules, to really target specific training goals. And doing that directly shifts the physical demands and how tired players get.
That makes total sense. It's like a concentrated shot of real gameplay, but one you can really fine-tune. Okay, so that's SSGS. Now the other piece, eccentric overload training, EOT. You hear this term more and more, especially with team sports. What makes EOT different from, say, just lifting weights in the gym?
Yeah, EOT is quite specific. It focuses almost entirely on the eccentric part of a muscle contraction. So that's when the muscle is lengthening, but it's still under tension. Think about lowering yourself down into a squat, that slow, controlled movement. That's your quad muscles working eccentrically. Or lowering a dumbbell after a bicep curl. EOT uses specific methods to really overload, to amplify the resistance during that lengthening or negative phase.
How does it do that? You mentioned specific methods.
Often it involves flywheel devices. These use a spinning disc, or sometimes a cone, to generate inertia. So you perform the concentric action, the pushing or pulling, which gets the disc spinning fast. Then, as the strap or cable recoils, the device actively pulls you back. And the key is you have to resist that pull with maximum effort through that eccentric lengthening muscle action. This creates a much, much higher load during that eccentric phase than you typically get with regular weights, where gravity is the main resistance.
Oh, okay. So it's really forcing that resistance on the way back.
Exactly. And the benefits, they're pretty well documented now across a range of sports. EOT is known to significantly improve sprint speed, boost your ability to change direction quickly, agility, basically enhance coordination, and fundamentally build stronger, faster muscles. And here's a really critical bit. It seems to play a major role in reducing muscle injuries, both how often they happen and how bad they are. We've seen studies showing things like better jump height and strength in handball players and improved jumping and sprinting in young soccer players, too. It's a powerful tool for athletic development.
Okay, so you've got SSGs great for game-like training, and EOT building stronger, faster, or injury-resistant muscles. Sounds like a perfect combination for athletes, right? But you mentioned this study addressed a critical gap. What was missing? What did we not know about how these two things, SSGs and EOT, actually work together in practice?
Well, that's exactly it. The gap was understanding how EOT specifically impacts performance, particularly locomotor and mechanical performance, during those small-sided games. We knew EOT worked well in controlled tests, like measuring a jump or a sprint in isolation, but SSGs are chaotic, unpredictable, much more like a real game. How does that intense eccentric training actually translate when players are constantly moving, reacting, accelerating, decelerating within that complex SSG environment? Does it still help? Or does it maybe create some temporary issues? That's the real-world question they wanted to answer.
Right, because testing in lab is one thing, but seeing what happens in training, in those game-like scenarios, that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah.
So how do they set this study up? Who are the players involved?
The study involved 22 elite male youth soccer players. Their average age was around 17.1 years old, and they were all part of a Spanish soccer academy. And importantly, they excluded goalkeepers and any players carrying injuries. This was to make sure the data was really clean, focusing just on outfield players undergoing the full training load. So a very specific, high-level group.
Okay, 22 elite youth players.
Yeah.
The study ran for 8 weeks, you said. How did they structure it? Was it like one group did EOT and the other didn't?
Exactly. It was a controlled study, though non-randomized, meaning players weren't randomly assigned. It spanned 8 weeks for the main intervention. They split the players into 2 groups. An eccentric overload training group, the EOT group, had 9 players, and a control group, the con group, had 13 players. Both groups carried on with their normal soccer training that was about 4 or 5 90-minute sessions on the field each week. The key difference, the EOT group added 1 extra session per week, specifically doing eccentric overload training using those flywheel devices. The control group just stuck to their regular schedule. And crucially, before they started, the researchers checked and found no significant differences in physical test results between the groups. So they were starting from a pretty level playing field.
1 extra session per week for the EOT group. What did that session actually involve? Like, what exercises were they doing, and how did they make sure it was challenging enough over the 8 weeks?
So the EOT group did 8 of these sessions in total, 1 each week. They used flywheel devices, as we mentioned, and focused on 5 key exercises really relevant to soccer. These were K-box squats, split squats, so single leg work, dynamic forward lunges, dynamic backward lunges, and also unilateral hamstring kicks using a device called a versapulley. Doing exercises on one leg at a time, the unilateral stuff, is obviously important for balance development in soccer.
And it wasn't just the same workout every week, right? They progressed it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It was carefully progressed. In terms of volume, they started fairly conservatively, 2 sets of 6 reps in the first week. But by week 8, they'd built up to 4 sets of 8 reps, which is quite demanding. Intensity was ramped up, too. They did this by adjusting the inertia settings on the flywheel, using settings from 0.025 up to 0.05 kilometer, depending on the week and reps. They also added more weights to the base of the device, going from 4 up to 10 weights, again, depending on the exercise. And they managed recovery with about 30 seconds rest between different exercises and a minute between sets. So enough to recover a bit, but keep the intensity up.
That sounds like a really structured, progressive overload. Okay, so they've got the training set up. But how on earth did they measure performance during the SSGs? That sounds complicated. You can't just watch with a stopwatch.
No, definitely not. It requires some pretty sophisticated tech. They ended up analyzing a huge amount of data, over 1,100 individual SSG observations, 1,117 to be exact. This data was collected over 15 weeks in total. 4 weeks before the EOT started, the 8 weeks during the intervention, and then 3 weeks after it finished to see any lingering effects. To capture everything, each player wore a portable GPS unit during all their training sessions. These weren't just basic GPS, they tracked at 10 hertz and also had 400 hertz triaxial accelerometers built in. Tiny devices, but they capture a ton of movement data.
Wow. So what kind of data did those devices give them? What variables were they actually looking at?
They broke it down into 2 main categories: locomotor and mechanical performance. For locomotor, basically, how players move around the pitch, they looked at total distance covered, high-speed distance that's running faster than 18 kilometer, very high-speed distance, over 21 kilometers, and sprint distance, which was over 24 kilometers, so how far and how fast they ran. Then for mechanical variables, this captures more of the intense, forceful actions. They measured the number of high-intensity accelerations, that's speeding up quickly, over 3 meters a punter, high-intensity decelerations, slowing down rapidly, below -3 meters surf, and something called player load.
Player load. What's that exactly?
Player load, or PL, is a measure calculated from the accelerometer data, those triaxial accelerometers. It basically sums up all the little bumps and shakes, the accelerations, in all 3 dimensions. It gives you a single number representing the overall physical stress or demand placed on the player's body, especially capturing those short, sharp, explosive movements.
Got it. So lots of detailed variables. But games vary. Players vary. How did they compare apples to apples?
Good question. That's where data normalization comes in. Because, yeah, one SSG might be longer than another or played on a different size pitch. So they normalized all the measures per minute of play. And then, crucially, they converted these per minute values into Z-scores. A Z-score basically tells you how much a player's performance in a specific session deviated from their own average for that type of SSG. A positive Z-score means they did more than usual. Negative means less. This standardization was key to making fair comparisons between the ERT and control groups, despite all the session-to-session variability.
Okay, that makes sense. Standardizing everything to see the real differences.
Yeah.
So after all this, the detailed training, the sophisticated tracking, the careful analysis, what did they actually find? Let's start with the locomotor stuff, the running, the distance, the speed. Did the EOT group start outrunning the control group?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating. The overall finding for locomotor variables was, well, not much difference. The study reported no significant differences between the EOT group and the control group for the C-scores of total distance, high-speed distance, or sprint distance when they looked across the entire pre, during, and post-intervention periods. So basically, adding that weekly EOT session didn't seem to significantly change how much distance the players covered or how much high-speed running or sprinting they did during these SSGs on average.
That is genuinely surprising. You hear about EOT improving sprint times and tests, so I might have expected, some kind of boost in sprinting distance during games. No consistent effect at all. You mentioned some weekly blips, though.
Yeah, there were a few isolated weeks where things looked different. Specifically, in weeks 1.4 and 2.4, the EOT group did show higher scores for total distance and high-speed distance, and also in week 2.1 for high-speed distance and week 1.4 for sprint distance. But, and this is important, the researchers didn't think this was a direct, consistent effect of the EOT itself. They suggested it was more likely due to the specific demands of the SSGs played in those particular weeks. Maybe a larger pitch size or a different game objective pushed those metrics up temporarily for that group. So, interesting little peaks, but not a sustained trend caused by the training intervention itself.
Okay, so the running performance, the locomotor stuff, largely unchanged by the weekly EOT.
Yeah.
But what about the mechanical side?
Yeah.
Those accelerations, decelerations, the overall player load. Was it the same story there? Because this is where it gets kind of counterintuitive based on what we discussed earlier.
Right, and this is where the story changes significantly. In complete contrast to the locomotor findings, they did find significant differences in the mechanical measures. The EOT group consistently showed significantly lower Z-scores for both high-intensity accelerations, ACC, and high-intensity decelerations, DE, compared to the control group. This pattern held across the board before, during, and after the intervention period. And it wasn't just ACC and DEC. The EOT group also consistently had lower C-scores for player load, PL, throughout all three phases of measurement.
Hold on, lower. So the group doing the extra strength training, the EOT, actually performed fewer high-intensity accelerations and decelerations and had a lower overall physical load during the game.
Exactly. That's what the data indicated.
So what does that mean? It feels backwards. You do training to get more explosive, but then you perform fewer explosive actions. How do we interpret that?
It's definitely the most intriguing finding. It suggests that while the EOT didn't hurt their overall running volume or top speeds in these games, it might have temporarily dampened their ability, or perhaps their tendency, to perform those really sharp, high-intensity changes of pace. The accelerating and decelerating, they're so crucial in soccer. And the lower player load scores reinforce that. It suggests a lower overall mechanical stress during the SSGs for the EOT group. The study also pointed out specific weeks where the control group had higher ACC and where PL differed, further supporting this pattern. It's a really nuanced picture.
It really is. So why? Why would this training, which we know makes muscles stronger and potentially more powerful, lead to fewer of these explosive actions in a game-like setting? What reasons did the researchers explore for this effect?
Well, they discussed a few potential mechanisms. One key factor is that EOT, precisely because it's so effective at overloading the muscle, can also induce significant muscle damage, at least temporarily. This can lead to things like DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, and a temporary decrease in the muscle's ability to function optimally. It causes quite a bit of mechanical strain, and there's even evidence it can affect the neuromuscular system, basically, the communication between the brain and the muscles, potentially reducing the capacity to produce maximum force quickly.
Ah, okay. So the very thing that makes it good for long-term adaptation might cause short-term fatigue or impairment.
Exactly. And those mechanical metrics, ACC, DEC, player load, seem particularly sensitive to this kind of fatigue. Think about it. Accelerating and decelerating hard relies heavily on the muscle's ability to rapidly absorb and produce force. often involving the stretch shortening cycle, like stretching and releasing a spring. If the muscles are still recovering from the micro damage caused by intense eccentric work, their ability to perform those explosive actions might be compromised.
So it's like maybe your muscles need a bit more time to fully recharge after that intense EOT session before they're ready to fire off those really explosive bursts again and again in a game. This idea of cumulative neuromuscular fatigue seems really central here. It makes you think about how we schedule training, doesn't it?
That's a really good way to put it, yeah. The cumulative effect of that weekly intense eccentric stimulus, without perhaps perfectly timed recovery relative to the SSGs, could lead to this underlying fatigue. It doesn't stop them running, but it might just take the edge off their ability or maybe even their willingness to constantly perform those peak intensity accelerations and decelerations. It highlights that EOT is potent, but needs careful management.
And this study's approach, looking at performance inside the SSGs, not just in lab tests, feels really important for understanding this. How does that real-world context, that ecological validity you mentioned, help us interpret these findings better?
It's hugely important. Its strength is precisely that it assesses performance within the complex, unpredictable environment of an SSG. That's much closer to what happens in an actual soccer match than, say, doing a counter-movement jump on a force plate. This ecological validity means the findings are likely more relevant, more directly applicable to coaches working with players day in, day out. It captures how fatigue, skill, tactics, and decision-making all interact, which you just don't get from isolated tests.
Yeah, it definitely paints a different picture than some earlier studies, which might have just shown, say, improved sprint times after EOT measured in a straight line. This gives us that crucial context of how it plays out amidst the chaos of a game.
Exactly. It's a more nuanced understanding.
So, boiling this all down for the coaches, the practitioners listening, what are the main practical takeaways? Should they use EOT? Avoid it? What's the message here?
The main message isn't to avoid EOT. Its benefits for strength, power, and especially injury prevention are well established and really valuable. The takeaway is more about how you integrate it. It seems EOT can be integrated cautiously into a training program to get those benefits without necessarily hurting overall physical or technical performance in the long run. But you need to be aware of this potential for a temporary dip in mechanical performance, especially those high-intensity actions. The real practical insight is that coaches need to manage EOT implementations smartly. It's not just plug and play. You have to consider the potential for fatigue and plan accordingly. The goal isn't just strength, it's readiness for the game.
Okay, so awareness and smart management are key. This raises that crucial question then. How can coaches actually balance it? How do they get the good stuff from EOT without seeing that temporary drop-off in accelerations and decelerations during their important SSG sessions?
The study and the discussion around it points towards a few key strategies. First, progressive adjustment is critical. You need to introduce EOT gradually, carefully increasing the intensity and volume over time, allowing players to adapt. Don't just throw them into the deep end. Second, monitor individual recovery really closely. Players respond differently. Using tools like wellness questionnaires or even simple readiness scores can help track how players are coping and recovering. Some might need more recovery time than others. And third, strategic scheduling is vital. Think carefully about when in the week you place the EOT session relative to matches and other high-intensity training, like demanding SSGs. You want to avoid layering too much intense stimulus without adequate recovery windows.
Right, so it's about being gradual, being observant of individual responses, and being clever about where it fits in the weekly plan. It sounds like the key is really managing that fatigue load to mitigate those temporary dips while still banking the long-term gains.
Precisely. It's intelligent integration, not just addition.
Now, you mentioned earlier, this study had some limitations, as all studies do. What were the main ones researchers pointed out that we should keep in mind when thinking about these results?
Yeah, they were upfront about the limitations. A key one was the small sample size, just 22 players, and all from one specific academy. That naturally makes it harder to say for sure if these same results would apply to, say, younger players, female players, or players at different levels. Also, the study design was non-randomized. Players weren't randomly assigned to the EOT or control group. While they checked baseline fitness, non-randomization always leaves open the possibility that some other factor influenced the group differences.
Okay, small sample, non-randomized. What else?
They also noted that the SSG formats themselves varied. Different pitch sizes, player numbers, or rules across different training days could have influenced how players performed, potentially muddying the waters a bit when comparing the groups. And finally, they mentioned that having a more precise way to quantify the actual eccentric workload during the EOT sessions, measuring things like peak force or total work done, could have provided even deeper insights into exactly how much stimulus the players were getting and how that related to the outcomes.
So given those points, small group, single academy, non-randomized, how much weight should coaches put on these findings right now? Is it more like, interesting, let's wait for more research, or is there enough here to start adjusting practice?
I think it's a bit of both. It's definitely a strong signal that warrants more research, absolutely. We need larger randomized trials across different populations, but it also offers immediate valuable food for thought for practitioners. It strongly suggests that simply adding EOT without careful consideration of fatigue and recovery might not yield the expected results within game-like training drills. It highlights the need for that individualized, carefully scheduled approach we talked about. It gives a more realistic perspective than just looking at isolated test improvements.
And thinking about that future research, where did the author suggest this line of inquiry should go next? What are the next questions to answer?
They pointed towards needing studies with larger and more diverse samples, different ages, skill levels, maybe male and female players to see how broadly these findings apply. They also stressed the importance of using controlled, randomized designs in the future to really nail down the cause and effect relationship. And another interesting avenue they suggested was exploring different frequencies of EOT. What happens if you do it twice a week? Or maybe less often, but with higher intensity. Finding that optimal dose and frequency is a key next step for practical application.
Makes sense. Lots more to explore there. Okay, let's try to wrap this up. It's been a really interesting deep dive. The core takeaway seems to be this. Weekly EOT offers some really significant long-term pluses for young elite soccer players. Think injury prevention, muscle development. That's clear. But, and it's a crucial but, implementing it can lead to this nuanced temporary reduction in mechanical performance during small-sided games. Specifically, fewer high-intensity accelerations and decelerations, and a lower overall player load. It's a powerful tool, no doubt, but it demands really careful, smart implementation and monitoring from coaches. You need to manage the fatigue to make sure players are ready for those explosive moments in game-like situations. And that leads us to a final thought, something for you to chew on. How do we truly master that balance? The balance between pushing training limits to achieve peak physical readiness while also ensuring optimal recovery and avoiding that trap of overtraining, especially when we're using these super intense methods like EOT. It's maybe less about what an athlete can do and more about what their body can sustainably recover from and adapt to. We definitely encourage you, if this topic interests you, to check out the full research article. There's always more detail, more nuance in the original source, and digging into it yourself can really deepen your understanding. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, if you found it useful getting this shortcut into the latest sports science, please make sure to follow the channel, turn on those notifications. That way you won't miss our next exploration designed to get you well informed fast. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.